Did you know there are certain questions that don't just start conversations, but change the emotional direction of them completely? I'm not talking about compliments, not flattery, and definitely not recycled pickup lines you've seen 100 times online. I'm talking about questions with intention, questions that slip past logic, bypass defenses, and lodge themselves deep in someone's emotional memory. Most men speak to be noticed. They talk to impress. They explain themselves, perform, and try to be liked. But power has never lived there. Power lives in what you make the other person reveal. This is something Machiavellian thinking understood centuries ago. Influence is not about expression. It's about extraction. The man who creates impact is not the one who talks the most, but the one who makes others open doors inside themselves they didn't even know were locked. And when it comes to attraction, especially emotional attraction, a woman doesn't connect to the man who dazzles her. She connects to the man who makes her feel something she can't easily explain. These questions may sound harmless on the surface, but they're anything but. They awaken desire, contradiction, curiosity, and emotional tension. They stir memories. They activate the subconscious. And once that happens, logic steps aside. This isn't content for people looking for shortcuts or tricks. This is for strategists, for men who understand that real seduction isn't about clever lines, but about emotional positioning. It's about how she feels in your presence, not what you say to her. Feeling is the real battlefield. And on that battlefield, reason doesn't win, emotion does. So listen closely, because when these questions are used with the right tone, at the right moment, and with silence as your ally, they can provoke reactions most men spend years chasing without ever understanding why they fail. This knowledge doesn't come from modern dating advice or surface-level psychology. It comes from power dynamics, from human nature, and from the invisible game that's always being played beneath words. If you're interested in understanding attraction from a deeper, more strategic, more realistic perspective, stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not taught openly. These are the kinds of questions that can make a woman rethink her choices, even when she has better options on paper. Let's begin. Most men fail at attraction because they don't know what to ask. They ask safe questions, predictable questions, comfortable questions, and comfort rarely creates desire. You're not here to be average. You're here to become the emotional trigger she didn't see coming, and that requires questions she won't forget. So here is the first one. Question 1. What kind of man is hard for you to forget, even if he wasn't good for you? This isn't a casual question. It's a direct entry into her emotional subconscious. You're not asking about her ideal partner. You're not asking what she's looking for. You're asking her to reconnect with a memory tied to intensity. A man who left a mark not because he was perfect, but because he created emotional chaos. Almost every woman has experienced this. A man who wasn't right, maybe even wrong for her, but unforgettable. Not because he was kind or stable, but because he made her feel alive, desired, uncertain, pulled into something that disrupted her emotional balance. When you ask this question, you're not just gathering information. You're bringing that memory back to life. You're inviting her to revisit her contradiction, the part of her that craves the forbidden even when she knows better. And here's the key. You're doing it calmly, without judgment, without trying to position yourself as better or different. As she speaks, something subtle happens. She's not just talking about him anymore. She's feeling what she felt then. And because you're the one who opened that door, her mind begins to associate that emotional intensity with you, not consciously, subconsciously. This is why your behavior matters here. You don't laugh. You don't react with shock. You don't correct her if she calls him toxic. You simply listen. You let her talk, You give her space. Silence here is not awkward. It's powerful. It deepens the emotion. If you say anything at all, keep it gentle. Something like, "That says a lot about you." Or, "I like how honest you're being." That's it. No stories about yourself. No comparisons. This is not a competition. This is extraction. And timing matters. Don't ask this in the first few minutes of meeting her, but don't wait months either. Use it when there's already comfort. A quiet walk. A late-night conversation. A moment where the energy has slowed down. Never ask this over text. It loses its effect. This question isn't about information, it's about sensation. Ask it, then be still. When she finishes, don't offer advice, just let it sit. A simple smile. Maybe say, "I understand you better now," and move on. If you do this right, you've just reached an emotional layer most men never touch. Now let's move to question number 2. This one doesn't just reveal desire, it reveals danger. Question 2. What is the most dangerous thing someone has ever awakened in you? This question changes the entire tone of the interaction. You're not digging into her past, you're planting an idea. The idea that you might also be dangerous, not recklessly, not loudly, but emotionally. And that kind of danger is magnetic. When you ask this, her mind pauses. People aren't asked this, ever. It forces her to reflect on something unfiltered, something raw, desire, obsession, recklessness, passion. Parts of herself she doesn't show easily. Often she'll hesitate. She might smile nervously. She might say, "I don't know if I should answer that." And that's your cue not to push, but to hold space. A calm look, a soft smile. Maybe a line like, "It's okay. Sometimes danger is beautiful." That single sentence does something powerful. It gives her permission to explore her shadow without fear of judgment. And when a woman feels accepted in her darker emotional space, it creates a form of intimacy that's deeply addictive. Most men want the pleasant version of her. You're signaling that you can handle the whole spectrum. And here's why this works so well. It pulls her out of rehearsed responses. It creates vulnerability. And emotional connections formed in moments of risk tend to be stronger and more memorable. As she answers, she's revealing what kind of energy shakes her emotionally. And you're right there, associated with that revelation. After she responds, you can subtly deepen the effect by saying something like, "Interesting. I get the feeling there's more you're not saying." Say it lightly, calmly, then stop talking. Now she's curious about you, about what you might awaken in her, about what you're holding back. That unspoken tension, that's the hook. And just like before, timing matters. Ask this when there's trust, when the atmosphere is quiet enough for pauses. And after you ask it, don't linger. Change the subject smoothly. Let her mind do the work later, because that's when you become unforgettable. And with that, we're just getting started. Now we move to question number 3. This one doesn't just disarm her. It quietly puts you inside her awareness in a way that's very hard to reverse. Question 3. What signals does your body give when someone starts to attract you, but you don't want it to show? This is a strategically elegant question. Why? Because you're no longer dealing with opinions or stories. You're entering the territory of the body, nonverbal language, the place where attraction leaks out before the mind can control it. By asking this, you're communicating something without ever saying it directly. I notice what others miss, and that alone changes how she feels around you. Most men wait for obvious signs. They look for green lights, clear invitations, verbal confirmation. You're doing the opposite. You're letting her describe how she betrays herself when she's trying not to. That creates a subtle tension immediately. When you ask this question, pay attention, not just to her words, but to her reaction. Often there's a nervous smile, a pause. She might look away, cross her legs, touch her hair, shift her posture. And the irony is, she's already answering the question with her body before she says a single word. Your job here is restraint. You don't comment on it right away. You don't smirk like you've won. You stay calm, observant, grounded. That composure is what turns this from a clever question into an emotionally charged moment. Why does this question work so well? Because it forces self-awareness. She starts watching herself. And once someone becomes aware of their own attraction signals, those signals intensify. Her body becomes more present, more reactive, more alive around you, even if she tries to suppress it. And here's the deeper layer. If she answers honestly, she's essentially telling you how to recognize her attraction in the future, even if she's hiding it, even if she denies it verbally. You've just positioned yourself as someone who can read her without chasing her. Now comes the Machiavellian twist. If she says something like, "I smile more," or "I get a little nervous," or "I talk faster," you pause, look at her, then calmly say, "Interesting, you just did that." And then you stop talking. That moment of silence creates micro-tension, not awkwardness, electricity. She feels seen, but not exposed in a threatening way. More like acknowledged, observed, understood. This kind of moment doesn't need flirting. It doesn't need escalation. It stands on its own. The key rule here: don't overuse this power. Say it once, calmly. No teasing, no laughter. Let it land. This interaction is unforgettable because it creates desire without stating it, awareness without pressure, and attraction without pursuit. Neurologically, it activates curiosity and dopamine, not comfort. And comfort can wait. Curiosity can't. Use this question when the environment allows for pauses, quiet moments, eye contact, stillness. Because once she feels that you can read her subtle cues, her body will have a much harder time lying to you the next time you're together. Now let's move to question number 4. This one taps into something deeper, her instinct to protect herself, and her longing to be deeply understood. Question 4. What is your most secret weakness? The one only someone truly special could discover. This is not casual curiosity. It's an invitation, and not an invasive one. You're not demanding vulnerability. You're offering exclusivity. Notice how the question is framed. You're not asking for a flaw. You're not asking what she's bad at. You're asking for something hidden, something protected, something she doesn't reveal easily. And embedded inside the question is a powerful suggestion. Some people aren't worthy of this information. If she answers, she's already placing you in a category above most men. Often, she won't answer directly. She'll hesitate. She might say, "That's very personal," or, "I don't know if I should say that." That hesitation is not rejection. It's tension. And tension is exactly what you want. Your response here matters more than the question itself. You don't push. You don't reassure. You don't explain yourself. You simply say something like, "You don't have to tell me, but now I'm already imagining it." That line does something important. It gives her control while keeping the emotional pressure alive. Her imagination turns on, and imagination is always more powerful than information. If she does choose to answer, listen carefully. Her response reveals how she bonds, how she protects herself, and what kind of emotional environment disarms her. That's not something you use immediately. That's something you understand. Because seduction isn't about exploiting weakness. It's about knowing where not to push, and where presence alone is enough. This question positions you as a man who doesn't force connection, but naturally invites it. And psychologically, that creates safety mixed with intrigue, a rare combination. Now we move to question number 5. This one goes straight to the core of inner conflict, the place where attraction and fear collide. Question 5. What does a man do that makes you feel slightly in danger, yet still want him more? Let's be clear. This is not about danger in a literal sense. This is emotional danger, the kind that creates adrenaline, uncertainty, pull. You're asking her to describe the edge of her desire, the boundary between safety and the forbidden. When a woman answers this question, she's not talking about what's good for her. She's talking about what moves her, and that distinction is everything. Many women are attracted to men who don't need them, but still choose them. Men who aren't easily impressed. Men who don't chase reassurance. Men who remain emotionally present without becoming dependent. If she says something like that, you've just been handed a blueprint. Not to imitate toxic behavior, but to understand what creates emotional gravity for her. This question isn't about becoming unpredictable or cruel. It's about selective presence, controlled distance, emotional self-containment. That's the Machiavellian essence here, knowing where the edge is and standing right next to it, without crossing. When asked at the right moment, this question pulls her into her emotional chaos zone. And if she feels that you already embody some of that energy, she begins associating you with the kind of man she finds difficult to resist. But remember, this is not about making her uncomfortable. It's about understanding her threshold. If she feels both drawn to you and unsure about you in a subtle way, she'll think about you far more than if everything feels clear and safe. That's why she'll remember you. And with that, we've covered the first half of the questions that begin to reshape how she experiences you. Not logically, but emotionally. Now we move to question number 6. This one is designed to quietly dismantle logic and guide her into imagining scenarios that include you, without you ever suggesting them directly. Question 6. What's the craziest thing you would do if no one ever knew it was you? At first glance, this might sound playful, light, even harmless. But psychologically, it's anything but. This question bypasses social identity. It removes reputation, judgment, and consequences. And when you remove those 3 things, what's left is impulse, fantasy, desire, the unfiltered self. You're not asking for a confession. You're not demanding a story. You're offering permission to think outside her rules. And that's what makes this question powerful. Most people live inside invisible cages built from expectations, how they should behave, what's acceptable, what kind of person they're supposed to be. This question opens the door for a moment and says, what if none of that mattered? When you ask it, she'll often laugh. She might shake her head. She might say, I can't say that, or that's dangerous, or I don't know. Perfect. The goal is not the answer. The goal is the mental image she creates the moment she considers it. Her mind starts moving. Fantasies surface. Curiosity awakens. And you are now linked to that mental state because you're the one who triggered it. You don't rush her. You don't insist. You can simply say something like, you don't have to say it. Thinking it is enough. That line does something subtle and powerful. It creates a silent bond, an unspoken understanding, almost like a shared secret that was never spoken, but still exists. From that moment on, The interaction between you carries a different charge. There's a layer beneath the conversation, a quiet tension, a sense of complicity. This is how desire grows without being forced. The forbidden, when suggested with restraint, has far more power than anything explicit. Now let's move to question number 7. This one doesn't just reveal attraction. It reveals how she behaves when she's starting to lose control emotionally. Question 7. How do you behave when you start falling for someone, but you don't want to admit it? This question is deceptively simple, and that's what makes it dangerous. You're not asking if she's fallen in love. You're not asking how she feels about you. You're asking how she hides her feelings, how she suppresses them, how she denies them. And as she answers, something fascinating happens. She begins to recall moments when she felt herself slipping, when attraction crept in quietly, when she tried to regain control, and if there is even the slightest emotional pull toward you already, her mind starts connecting those patterns to her current behavior. She starts watching herself. If she says something like, "I pull away," or "I get distant," or "I act colder than I feel," you don't challenge her. You don't tease her. You simply acknowledge it. You might say calmly, "So that's how I'd know." Then stop talking. That single sentence reframes her behavior. Now, if she pulls away later, she'll remember this moment. She'll wonder if you noticed, if you understood, if you saw through her. This plants a seed of self-awareness that grows quietly. And here's why this works psychologically. When someone becomes aware of their own emotional patterns, especially ones tied to attraction, those patterns become harder to control. She may deny it outwardly, but inwardly, the thought remains. Is this happening to me again? That question alone can create obsession. This interaction doesn't force intimacy. It invites introspection. And introspection tied to another person creates emotional gravity. Now we move to question number 8. This one reaches into her emotional archive, the place where unforgettable men are stored. Question 8. What left the biggest mark on you from a man, even if he's no longer in your life? Notice what you're not asking. You're not asking who he was. You're not asking what the relationship was. You're asking what he did. What moment, gesture, or energy left a permanent imprint? This distinction is critical. Names fade. Details blur. But emotional impressions remain vivid. When she answers this question, she's reconstructing a memory that still carries weight. And memory, neurologically, is not passive. When we remember, we relive. The brain activates the same emotional circuits. And because you're present while she's reliving it, her mind begins associating that emotional state with you. If she says something like, "He made me feel like I was the only one," even without words, she's revealing what creates emotional impact for her: silent intensity, presence, attention without pressure. That's not something you copy mechanically. It's something you embody if it aligns with who you are. This is the Machiavellian strategy at work. You're not competing with the past. You're reframing it. You're allowing an old emotional pattern to be experienced in a new context, with a different presence. And the brain doesn't clearly distinguish between remembering and experiencing. That's how association forms. This question also shows you what kind of emotional energy leaves lasting marks on her. Some women remember consistency. Others remember unpredictability. Others remember moments of deep understanding. Once you understand this, your behavior naturally becomes more precise, not forced, but aligned. Now let's move to question number 9. This one appears innocent, but when used correctly, it can ignite a powerful internal dialogue. Question 9. Has it ever happened that someone attracted you and you couldn't explain why? This is a trap question, but not for her, for logic. You're asking about irrational attraction, desire without explanation, curiosity without reason. When she answers, she's admitting that not all attraction makes sense, that sometimes feeling overrides understanding. And here's the key. As she reflects on those experiences, you're sitting right in front of her. If she says yes, and most people will, you don't react. You don't smile knowingly. You simply let the silence stretch for a second longer than usual. Then you might say softly, "Sometimes the things we can't explain are the most real." And you stop. That silence echoes. It creates a gap her mind wants to fill. And often, what fills it is a question she doesn't voice. Is this happening now? Psychologically, this activates cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when feelings don't align with beliefs. And humans are wired to resolve that discomfort. They analyze, they think, they revisit interactions, they search for reasons. And in doing so, they intensify the feeling. You're not saying, "You're attracted to me." You're asking if attraction ever defies explanation. And suggestion, when subtle, lasts far longer than declaration. Now we arrive at question number 10, the most strategic of all. This one doesn't ask for desire. It plants belonging. Question 10. If someone could understand you without you having to explain yourself, what place would they have in your life? This question doesn't demand anything. It invites imagination. You're not asking where you would fit. You're asking her to imagine a role for someone who sees her completely. No masks, no effort, no performance. This taps into a fundamental human need: to be understood without being dissected, to be seen without being judged. As she considers the question, her mind creates an image, a scenario, a feeling. And once again, you're there when it happens. If she says something like, "That kind of person is rare," you don't reassure her. You don't promise anything. You simply say, "Maybe not as rare as it seems." Then you stop. Because silence, when used intentionally, becomes your signature. This question isn't about answers. It's about after effects. Thoughts that resurface later. Moments when she remembers the conversation and feels something she can't quite label. That's how presence is built. Not through force, but through resonance. If even one of these questions made you pause, imagine what happens when they're used at the right moment, with the right tone, and the discipline to remain silent afterward. Words can be weapons, but in the hands of a strategist, they become doors. Up to this point, you've seen how each question works on its own, but here's what most people miss. The real power is not in the questions themselves. It's in how and when you use them, and just as importantly, in what you don't do afterward. This is where many men ruin everything. They ask a powerful question, and then they talk too much. They get nervous. They try to explain themselves. They rush to fill the silence, and in doing so, they collapse the tension they just created. So, before we go any further, you need to understand one core principle that governs all emotional strategy. Intensity is created in the space between words, not in the words themselves. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. When you ask a question that touches emotion, memory, or identity, the silence that follows is what allows the feeling to expand. If you interrupt it, you steal that moment from her and from yourself. This is why restraint is not optional. It's the difference between curiosity and discomfort, between intrigue and manipulation. Now let's talk about how these questions should be sequenced, because order matters more than most people realize. You don't start with the deepest questions. You earn the right to ask them. The first questions open doors. The later ones walk her through them. Think of it like descending levels. Each layer prepares the next. If you jump straight to vulnerability without emotional groundwork, it feels invasive. If you stay too shallow for too long, it feels boring. The art is in sensing when the energy is ready to shift. And that sensing requires presence, not strategy in your head, presence in your body. When you're fully present, you notice her breathing change. You notice pauses. You notice when she stops performing and starts responding. That's when deeper questions land. Now, let's address something critical. These questions are not tools to be fired rapidly. You do not ask them back to back like an interview. One question per interaction is often enough. Sometimes two. Rarely more. Why? Because each question creates emotional residue. That residue needs time to settle. When you overload the moment, the effect blurs. But when you leave space, the mind does the work for you, long after the conversation ends. This is where most men underestimate the power of delayed impact. They want immediate results, immediate validation, immediate confirmation. But emotional influence doesn't work like that. Influence works when she keeps thinking about you after you're gone, when she replays a moment, when a sentence echoes back at night, when a question resurfaces while she's alone. That's how attachment forms, not through repetition, but through imprinting. Now let's talk about tone, because the same word spoken with the wrong energy will backfire. These questions must never be asked with excitement. They must never sound playful, eager, or performative. Your tone should be calm, grounded, almost neutral, as if you're not invested in the answer but curious. This communicates emotional self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is deeply attractive because it suggests choice, not need. You're not asking because you need something from her. You're asking because you're exploring. And exploration feels safe. Interrogation does not. Another critical rule: never justify the question. The moment you explain why you're asking, you weaken it. If you say, "I'm asking because I'm really into psychology," or "I just find this stuff interesting," you pull the question back into logic. And logic kills tension. Ask the question, then stop. If she asks, "Why do you ask?" you can simply say, "I like how people think." Or, "I'm curious about what shapes someone." Short, calm, no defense. Now let's talk about what not to do after she answers, because this is where emotional damage is often done unintentionally. First, do not analyze her answer out loud. This is not therapy. This is not a breakdown. When you start dissecting her words, you move from presence to control, and she feels it immediately. Second, do not relate it back to yourself. This is not the moment to say, "I'm like that too," or "I have experienced something similar." That shifts the spotlight away from her emotional experience and back onto you. And the power of these questions lies in her being immersed in her own inner world, with you as the silent witness. Third, do not try to escalate physically immediately after. This is subtle but important. Emotional depth does not demand instant physical action. When you rush, it feels transactional. Let the emotional current exist on its own. If something physical happens naturally, fine. If not, even better. Because now there's unfinished energy, and unfinished energy is magnetic. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Some people will hear this and think, "Isn't this manipulation?" The answer depends on intention. Manipulation seeks control without responsibility. Strategy seeks understanding with restraint. If your goal is to overpower, dominate, or exploit vulnerability, these questions will eventually betray you, because emotional intelligence without integrity creates instability. But if your goal is to understand how attraction actually works, to stop lying to yourself about human nature, and to interact consciously rather than blindly, then this is not manipulation. It's awareness. And awareness always carries responsibility. You are responsible for the emotional environments you create. That means knowing when not to go deeper. If a woman becomes visibly uncomfortable, shuts down, or changes her energy in a defensive way, you stop. Immediately. You don't push. You don't handle it. You change the subject. You lighten the tone. You ground the interaction again. Power is not persistence. Power is control. And the highest form of control is knowing when to withdraw. Now let's talk about why these questions linger. Because understanding this will help you use them wisely. The human brain is wired to complete open loops. A question that touches emotion without resolving it creates an open loop, and the mind hates unfinished loops. So it revisits them. That's why silence after a powerful question is more effective than clever follow-up. That's why not explaining yourself creates more attraction than reassurance. That's why leaving on a high point rather than dragging the interaction out makes you memorable. You are not trying to be impressive. You are trying to be felt. And feeling is never rushed. In the final part, we're going to bring everything together. We'll talk about how to recognize when these questions have worked, how to avoid becoming predictable, and why the most dangerous men are not the ones who speak boldly, but the ones who understand timing, scarcity, and emotional economy. Because words are only weapons when they're used sparingly. And mastery is not about saying more, it's about knowing exactly when to stop. Now we bring everything together. Because if you understand these questions but don't understand when they've already worked, you'll either overplay your hand or miss the moment entirely. The first sign that a question has landed is not enthusiasm. It's not excitement. And it's definitely not verbal confirmation. The real sign is change. A change in her pace. A change in her tone. A change in how she looks at you, or avoids looking at you. She may become quieter, more thoughtful, slightly slower, or she may laugh softly and then stop. These micro shifts are not random. They mean something moved inside her. When that happens, your job is not to press forward. Your job is to hold steady. Most men panic in this moment. They feel the shift and think they need to do something to maintain it. So they talk, they joke, they escalate, they explain, and they kill it. When you feel the shift, you don't add energy, you remove friction, you stay calm, you let the silence breathe, you let her process. Because the moment she starts processing internally, the interaction has moved from social to emotional, and that's exactly where influence lives. Another sign the questions have worked is delayed response. She may not react strongly in the moment, but later she reaches out, or she references something you said, or she asks a deeper question herself. This is critical. Emotional impact is often invisible at first. People don't always react when something touches them deeply. Sometimes they need distance to feel it fully. That's why restraint after the interaction is just as important as restraint during it. If you suddenly become more available, more talkative, more eager after creating depth, you reverse the polarity. You turn intrigue into familiarity, and familiarity without desire leads nowhere. So here is a rule few men understand. After a deep interaction, slightly reduce your presence, not increase it. Not dramatically, not coldly, just enough to create space. Space allows emotion to echo. Now let's talk about scarcity, because without it, none of this holds long-term power. Scarcity is not about disappearing. It's about not over-explaining your availability. You don't need to announce when you're busy. You don't need to justify why you're leaving early. You don't need to narrate your life. You simply move with intention. When you ask deep questions but live shallowly, the contrast feels off. But when your presence is measured, your time selective, and your attention intentional, the questions feel congruent. Congruence is everything. If your words suggest depth but your behavior suggests need, the illusion breaks. Now here's another mistake many men make. They start memorizing these questions, they turn them into a script, and the moment something becomes scripted, it loses its edge. These questions are not meant to be performed. They're meant to be felt. If you ask them mechanically, she'll sense it. Not consciously, but instinctively. The energy will feel off. So instead of memorizing the exact wording, understand the category each question belongs to. Emotional memory, hidden desire, self-betrayal, vulnerability, inner conflict, fantasy, denial, imprinting, irrational attraction, belonging. Once you understand the category, you can adapt the wording naturally to the moment. That's how it stays authentic. That's how it stays alive. Now let's address one final crucial point. You must be willing to hear answers you don't like. If you ask these questions hoping to control outcomes, you will fail. These questions reveal truth, and truth doesn't always flatter the ego. She may describe men unlike you. She may reveal desires that challenge your self-image. She may expose contradictions that feel uncomfortable. That's not a threat. That's information. The man who grows uncomfortable with truth is the man who cannot hold power. Power requires emotional neutrality. You listen, you observe. You don't react, you don't judge. You don't try to reshape her answer into something safer. Why? Because the moment she senses judgment, the door closes. And once it closes, it rarely opens again. The men who leave the deepest marks are not the ones who are perfect. They're the ones who held space without flinching. Now here's the paradox most people don't expect. When used correctly, these questions don't make you louder in her mind. They make you quieter, and that quiet presence becomes heavy. She thinks about what you didn't say. She replays moments you didn't explain. She fills gaps you intentionally left open. That's when attraction shifts from conscious to subconscious. At that point, you don't chase. You don't pursue. You don't do anything. You let gravity work. And gravity only works when there's mass. Mass is built through consistency, restraint, and emotional self-control. Not through performance. Not through effort. Not through validation seeking. So if there's one thing you should remember from all of this, it's this. The most dangerous men are not the ones who say bold things. They're the ones who understand timing, silence, and emotional economy. They don't need to impress. They don't need to convince. They don't need to be understood immediately. They let understanding come to them. Words, in the wrong hands, are noise. But in the hands of someone who knows when to speak and when to stop, they become doors. Doors that once opened are never forgotten. And that is the difference between attention and impact.